Right now, the highest point in Michigan is not a mountain. It is the waste pile of an iron mine.
Welcome to the Our Hen House interview. This is Jasmine Singer.
This is Marianne Sullivan.
And we're so excited to welcome our guests today, Sol Anzorena and Tom Grotewohl, who are artists and authors and activists. Those are our three favorite A things. And they really exemplify that bumper sticker that we've all had, think globally, act locally, in their fight to save the Porkies, aka the Porcupine Mountains of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and all their inhabitants. So I'm very excited to welcome you. Welcome to our Hen House. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. We're excited.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, let's give our audience a little bit of a glimpse into some of the work that you've been doing. Marianne, do you want to read their bios?
Sol Anzorena was born in the Andes Mountains of Argentina, grew up in southern Spain, and studied fine arts in Spain, Poland, and Brazil. Her photography has appeared in publications such as Vogue, Humana Obscura, and The Sun magazine. She also composes songs for guitar under the name Maple Moon, and she loves to design beaded earrings, two of which she is wearing right now. And they are inspired by the birds and insects of the North Woods. Oh, God, I love the North Woods. She's currently working on an illustrated book to talk about light pollution. Tom Grotewold is a writer and musician who co-founded Protect the Porkies, a grassroots campaign fighting to protect the Porcupine Mountains, the North Country Trail, and Lake Superior from a proposed copper mine. And Sol and Tom are also the co-authors of my new favorite book, Reynard the House Wolf.
That's so cute. I love it so much. That's such a great book. So congratulations, first of all. That's that must have been, was that fun to work on together?
Yeah, it was mostly fun. There were some moments of we both are very perfectionists in our own ways. So, we had to work through that. And it took us 5 years to make it. So, of course, we went through a lot of different phases in that process.
And are you a couple?
Yeah.
Okay. I assumed so based on your answer just now, but I wanted to just make sure that that's brave to work on a creative project with your partner. But it came out so beautifully. So I'm glad you persevered. 5 years, you said?
Yeah, 5 years. We had to leave it here and there for a couple months and refresh our inspiration. But yeah, in all, to get it printed, 5 years.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, sometimes we would leave it for 6 months, get burnt out on it, and try to forget about it for a while, and then come back to it.
And then come back and delete a whole lot of things.
Right.
Yeah, we wrote the whole thing and then decided, wait, it actually all needs to rhyme. And so then we redid it all, and there were a couple of waves of kind of destruction and recreation.
I mean, what a life metaphor.
I think it's admirable that your relationship survived through this, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, me too. For those of you who are watching this on YouTube, and just a reminder, we are on YouTube as well as on every podcatcher. If you're more of an audio person, you can see Sol's phenomenal earrings. They're absolutely stunning. And before we really get into your campaigns, I just want to remind our listeners that the Our Hen House podcasts come out throughout the week. Rising Anxieties comes out on Tuesdays, the Hen Report on Thursdays, and the long form interview, which is this, on Fridays. Bonus content for our Hen House flock members comes out on Mondays. And so thank you for being here. All right, let's get into I want to set the scene a bit. Can you tell us about the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and the Porcupine Mountains and your connection to that area? Set the scene for us, and then we'll dig into the campaigns a bit.
Sure. Yeah, so the Upper Peninsula, a lot of folks may never have thought about it or seen it on a map. So I would encourage folks to pull up a map and look at that part north of Wisconsin. That looks like it's part of Wisconsin. It's actually part of Michigan, and it's between 3 Great Lakes on the south shore of Lake Superior. And, it's a beautiful area that has been inhabited by native people for many thousands of years. And unlike in many parts of the country where there was a trail of tears and the natives were evicted from their ancestral land, most of the native people were able to stay in this part of the world, which is great. So the heritage of this area goes back, very far. But there is a small section of people who say that the heritage of this area is mining. The UP has, we call it the UP, meaning the Upper Peninsula. It still has a lot of forest. It even has old growth forest that's never been logged. And the reason it has so much forest left is because the soil is bad for agriculture conventionally, because there's so many rocks, there's so much geology, and that makes it good for mining. And so that's where there comes in a bit of conflict in terms of some of the industries that want to come in and profit from this beautiful place. But there have been a lot of mines over the last 150 years, and there hasn't really been too much going on in the past few decades, but now there's a call for renewed mining in the Upper Peninsula. And like a lot of the Upper Midwest, this area is very rich in water. You know, states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, the whole North Woods area. But Michigan has the most fresh water of any state in the continental US. And mining and water sometimes do not mix very well. In fact, they almost never mix well together. So we're fortunate to live right next door to Porcupine Mountain State Park, which is actually the largest old growth forest remaining in mainland Michigan. So if you think, you know, where everybody lives, wherever you're listening to this, probably over 95% of the original forest in your state was logged and destroyed. And so we get used to being surrounded by secondary and tertiary forests, which are very beautiful and they sustain a lot of life forms. But old growth forests have never been interrupted. And so the kind of diversity of ecology is a lot deeper. And we're very fortunate to have the Porcupine Mountains here, or what the locals call the Porkies. We're also right next door to Lake Superior, which is the largest and cleanest of all the freshwater lakes on the continent. And we're also very near to the North Country Trail, which is the longest of all national hiking trails. It goes about 5,000 miles from North Dakota to Vermont. And right smack dab in the middle of all of this majesty, there's a company that wants to start a copper mine.
How did you first find out about this mine, and who wants to build it, and what is the exact plan?
Right. Well, it was very hard to find information because it wasn't readily available on the internet. Most of the folks we talked to, they didn't think it was an operational project. They thought it was just something that people talked about 10 years ago, and then the price of copper went down and the project went away. But we were actually working at the state park for a while, just down the road from us. We were the folks selling your tickets, cleaning the bathrooms, giving trail advice. And a guy drove through the entrance booth and he said, "Where's the Copperwood mine? Where's Copperwood?" And
I
it turned
can't
out
believe that's how you found out there was a mine.
Yeah. And it turns out he was with a mining resistance group from Wisconsin.
Okay.
And so he was able to give us some information. And the plan essentially is to extract the copper. But, you know, before we went into this, we knew nothing about mining. So I hear copper mine and I think, okay, most of what's coming out of the ground is copper. Actually, copper is only 1.45% of what they're extracting. And the remaining 98.55% is waste, which they have to store on site. It gets pulverized and mixed with water in order to separate the copper. And the reason they have to contain that waste is because it's toxic. It has mercury, arsenic, cadmium, lead, all kinds of stuff, which is maybe fine when it's underground inside the rock. But when you pulverize it and mix it with water and it becomes absorbable into the ecosystem, then it's not a good thing. And they would be storing this 150 feet from the state park and upstream and uphill from Lake Superior. This is a Canadian company that has never started or run a mine before, so they're quite inexperienced. And the copper in question would be shipped to Canada for processing. And we're just trying to educate folks and suggest that maybe it's not a good deal for, of course, for Michigan and the United States, but also not a good deal for the incredible life forms that live here in this sensitive area. You know, like the copper has value because it is needed for some things and because it's relatively scarce. But what about old growth forest? Old growth forest is extraordinarily scarce. What about a clear view of the night sky where you can see all the stars? What about clean water, a stream that you can actually drink directly from and not fear getting poisoned by contamination? All of these things are much scarcer and more valuable than copper. So we're trying to help people understand that the harms outweigh the gains in this case.
And who owns the land? And what is the relationship to the state park?
Yeah. So the land is owned by the mining company. It's on private property. Their name is Highland Copper. But the state park is on, of course, state land, but they don't own all of the mineral rights underneath the park. So in Michigan, I don't know if this is true in most of these states with mining, but there's what's called severed mineral rights. So the surface owner may not own what's underneath the ground. And so the mining company's mineral deposit actually extends underneath the most beautiful section of the park. And they actually intend to mine underneath a portion of the state park and potentially a larger portion. The mineral deposit actually goes underneath Lake Superior as well. So they may seek permits to mine underneath Lake Superior. The good news is they lack over $400 million to get up and running. They don't have the power grid, the cell towers, the roads. So what we've been doing is fighting to make sure that they don't get money and to slow the project down. But in spite of not having the resources to move forward, they've already destroyed over 60 acres of wetlands. They've destroyed streams. They've clear-cut dozens of acres of forest. And they take no account of all of the life forms, the frogs, the turtles, the insects, anything else that lives there.
This is heartbreaking. It really is. I want to get into the campaign specifically, but I want to explore the situation a little bit more, particularly what you just brought up, the animals. From a wildlife perspective, what animals live there, and what would, some of the implications are obvious, but can you just give us kind of the overview of what would be the implications for them of this industrial operation being dropped right there on their doorstep?
Sure. Yeah, so the UP, we're part of the North Woods, so we probably share some of the wildlife that you might get in a wooded area in New York. We've got black bears for sure. But this is also a very wild area, so there are wolves that come through here. There are mountain lions. There are all sorts of newts and salamanders, many kinds of fish. We saw a weasel the other day, which was very exciting. There are lynxes. The list goes on and on. But the Northwoods, and especially this area, is known for warblers, many of the migratory songbirds that come through. And the thing about all of these creatures is they come to places that feel like nature. So when you start a mine somewhere, or any highly destructive operation, but especially a mine, it's not just the water pollution, it's all of the noise that comes from subterranean blasting, from rock grinding, from heavy machinery, from the increased traffic. It's all of the light. Mining is a 24-hour operation, so that bleaches the night skies in a pristine area. So with migratory songbirds, for example, they quickly will depopulate an area if they can't hear each other's calls, because that's what they do in order to mate and communicate with each other. So if they can't hear each other, they leave. For light pollution, we often don't think about light pollution. It doesn't get the press that some other forms of pollution get. But for many creatures, what humans have done by lighting up the night sky is the largest impact we've had on the planet. Because light pollution, it travels much further and faster than any other form of pollution. And so for organisms like fireflies, if it's too bright, then they can't see each other's patterns and they don't mate. It's like trying to drop a pickup line when you're at a noisy construction site. It's going to get lost in translation. For all of these nocturnal frogs that sing at night, also in order to mate, if it's too bright or if it's too noisy, if it's too bright, they don't even start singing. And if it's too noisy, they don't hear each other. So light and noise will create a zone around the mine site that goes beyond private property lines into the state park, into the North Country Trail, into these places that people love to visit because they feel wild, and that, of course, all of the life forms need because it's their home. But then, yeah, the water pollution, the air pollution on top of that adds just a whole other layer of destruction to the area.
Another interview I did recently involved light pollution too. It was about the lawsuit to close Alligator Alcatraz. I use the term because that's what they call it, but it's disgusting. They gave it a cute name, the immigrant detention facility in the Everglades. And yeah, the Center for Biological Diversity was making the point that light is just poison for so many animals who are living in, and it's not like just the immediate area. I think she said like it was like 15, 20 miles they would be able to sense light that was not supposed to be there. And they would change their habitats. Anyway, I digress, but I think it's really an underrated source of the many horrible things we do to wild animals.
Yeah,
Certainly.
I wouldn't have. I haven't given it a whole lot of thought, to be honest, and this is all sort of blowing my mind a little bit in not a great way. What are the? I don't know how to pronounce this. I'm sorry, but what are the red side days, and how are they part of this story?
Well, right now, the mining company, even though the mine doesn't exist, they still have to apply for permits from the state of Michigan to do the things that they would like to do later on when they have money. So the permit they're applying for now is to discharge wastewater into a stream where a great many creatures live and also a state endangered fish. So, a mine can use as much water as a medium-sized town, and it has to then discharge that water somewhere. A lot of that water comes from the underground chamber, which might be full of groundwater that gets mixed with the rock that they have to pulverize. And then they try to remove as much of that water as possible from the pulverized rock. And so the water brings with it mercury and arsenic and lead. They filter some of that through reverse osmosis, but they can't filter all of it. And then they have to put it somewhere. So in this case, they want to discharge it into a local stream. And there is a fish, the red-side dace, which only exists a few places in Michigan. And at least one has been documented downstream from their proposed discharge site. And several others have been documented upstream from where wastewater would flow. And so we're challenging that permit and telling Michigan's regulators to deny it. And it's interesting, we're learning a lot as we advance this campaign. But the idea that what happens downstream only affects, creatures downstream from the flow, actually, we're learning that it can also affect organisms that live upstream from wherever contamination is happening. Because, fish, many of them have to eat insects to survive. And many of these insects will migrate from downstream to upstream later on in their lives. So if you contaminate a downstream region and it reduces the insect population, then it's fewer insects that can migrate upstream to feed these fish. So we're making the argument that both the red-side dace living downstream and upstream will be harmed by this proposal, as well as a great many other creatures that the company is not even accounting for. Actually, they released a fact sheet. We've inspired hundreds of people to submit comments to the regulators. And so the mining company was forced to respond. And they actually released a fact sheet saying that this stream was selected because it has no aquatic species, which is a preposterous claim. There is no stream in the world that doesn't have some sort of life in it, even contaminated streams. But a relatively pristine stream in the Upper Peninsula has all kinds of life forms in it. But the people in charge are completely nature blind. Their spreadsheets do not account for any of the life that is existing here.
I wonder if one of the things that, no, probably not, but I'll talk about this anyway. Like the fact that red-side dace are state endangered, is that what you said? Not like it's so convenient when there's a species that is endangered. And, I love the Endangered Species Act, and I love that we value, want to save endangered species. But sometimes it seems like there's this other idea that all the rest of them don't matter because, there's plenty of them. And that's just it's such a wrong attitude. Like the only reason we should protect them is if we've almost driven them to the edge of extinction. But it is convenient that you have at least one species in there that is legally protected. I want to get to the campaign, but just to explore a little bit more about what's going on. You mentioned that there's going to be all this toxic waste and that it's going to be stored. I mean, obviously, that's very bad. And I'm sure there are a million reasons that's very bad. But what are they claiming? I mean, I assume they have like claims about what they're going to do to make this okay and why it's all going to be fine. Like, what is their argument that because it seems pretty obvious that putting millions of tons of toxic waste right next to a protected area or anywhere for that matter is a bad thing.
Yeah. The argument they use, it's the same as always. They say, this time will be different. So, right now in the Upper Peninsula, about 35% of lakes have elevated mercury levels because of the history of mining here. And so in this new wave of mining, we're seeing companies say, yeah, but forget about that. That was the past. It's all going to be better now. And it is true that, technology does get better and maybe some aspects of mining are superior than they were before. It doesn't change the fact that they have to destroy all these wetlands, destroy the forests, destroy the streams just to get a blank slate, to start their operation. But in terms of the waste, they say it's going to be contained, so don't worry about it. But, if you look at the Upper Peninsula on Google Earth, you can see that some of these waste facilities or these waste basins, they're visible from space. They are some of the largest structures that humans have ever created. Right now, the highest point in Michigan is not a mountain. It is the waste pile of an iron mine a couple hours away from us. And so in a best case scenario, the waste will be stored and it will never leach out. And it will just provide a toxic area where plant life and other wildlife really struggles to get a hold, but it won't leach out into the surrounding area. In a medium case scenario of what could happen would be a gradual seepage, which is more common, which could take place over the course of years or decades. In a worst case scenario, there can be a cataclysmic rupture where you just get a flood of mine waste surging out into the area, into the river, into the lake. And unfortunately, that has happened in many mines all over the world, even ones that are run by folks at the top of the field who say it's never going to happen.
Wow. All right, let's talk about that campaign. How did it start?
Well, when we moved here and we learned about what's happening with the mine, actually we started hearing that there was clear cut being done there, and we could hear it from our porch, and that was very distressing. And we lost a lot of nights of sleep thinking about it and how it was so nightmarish. So we decided to just start a website to spread the information, the little information that we had. And Tom started a change.org petition, and overnight we got about 1,000 or 2,000 signatures. And from then, it started spreading through the internet. We also started like an Instagram and just sharing information here and there, asking for people to help us spread that information. And with the months, it started picking up, and with reels, all of this got a lot of views and attention. And yeah, it grew organically in this way, just because of people learning that this was a project that could happen and they didn't want that. So yeah.
And was the support you were gathering like all over the place, or is there a lot of local support? Is there any local support for the mine? Is it offering jobs or other things? Is there controversy about it, or does everybody actually think it's a bad idea?
Yeah, it's quite controversial. Before our campaign, there was no information readily available. And so a lot of folks in this area who had previously supported it had never even seen a map of how close it was to the state park, how close it was to the lake. So all we did was take the company's own documents and just put them on the internet for folks to see. And so right now, there are certainly a handful of people in the area who support the mine because it will create jobs in the short term.
Right.
What we're trying to do is show them that, mining in the long term actually degrades the economy, which is why heavily mined areas like the UP or West Virginia, we don't think of these places as wealthy areas because mining hasn't really been good for the long-term health of the economy. So, and the waste pile will last forever. The contamination has long-term effects. So we're trying to encourage people to move beyond short-term thinking. But there are loads of local folks who are opposed to the project. We hold meetings in the area. We just had a meeting last week where we held a gathering for folks to write letters and postcards to the Export-Import Bank of the United States, which is a federal agency that is considering giving this project $250 million. So, that's a lot of money. It would really advance the project, make it much more a real nightmare than the copper pipe dream than it is right now. So anyone who's listening, we're asking folks from all around the country and all around the world to write physical letters to the Export-Import Bank of the United States. You can go to protecttheporkies.com and click Take Action. And that's where you'll find all the ways you can participate in the campaign.
Okay. We'll put that in the show notes as well.
Great. But that's a way that, anybody who's listening to this today and feels like they want to do something, but they don't live in the area, you can write a letter. This is the federal government we're talking about. And, normally a campaign like this, you might just do a mass email flooding of the decision maker. But so many folks are desensitized to emailing, and especially when you get hundreds in your inbox, it's just kind of annoying, and you can delete them all in a couple button clicks. So we think actually getting physical mail on somebody's desk, it seems old-fashioned, but now it's actually quite novel. It makes a big impact, especially if you get a big duffel bag full of letters from people telling you don't destroy that area.
We have about 100 postcards that we're going to send to this bank, and it takes like it's a big pile of postcards, only 100, but it makes a big difference,
Yeah.
But that was just from one gathering. So people around the country now, they're making their own gatherings. They're getting together with family and friends.
That's great. And I have also always heard that the best way to communicate with either a personal phone call to communicate with your legislators. A personal phone call is good, but a handwritten letter is golden. It's annoying. It's like I can barely write anymore, but that's what everyone says. I think it's probably true. You've had some success in stepping back a minute from the current campaign about the bank and at the federal level. Let's start with, because you've had some success at the state level, right?
Yeah. Michigan was going to almost certainly give the project $50 million. And normally that kind of proposal might fly under the radar. This is a remote area where not a lot of people live. So, we started telling Michiganders about this proposal. That's when the campaign really picked up steam, when people realized that their own taxpayer dollars could be used to help a Canadian mining company, devastate a beautiful area. Nothing wrong with being from Canada, by the way, but we're talking about an extractive company that's coming in to destroy an area. So that was when the campaign really picked up a lot of momentum, and people started calling and writing to their lawmakers. We led some in-person visits to the Capitol. We held a 200-person protest around the Capitol there in Lansing, Michigan. And we actually went inside the building and chanted at the lawmakers around the rotunda. And they denied that funding to the mining company. They came back the next year and reintroduced it again, and they realized it didn't look good giving taxpayer dollars to the mining company. So they rewrote it to say this money will go to the local township, but it will be used to advance the mine. And we saw through that very quickly. Everybody else saw through it. So we've actually defeated this $50 million proposal 3 times now.
Wow.
And we have a number of allies among lawmakers in Michigan's capital who don't want to see this advance.
This has really become your life, hasn't it? All encompassing. You wrote a little change.org petition and changed
now it's
lives a lot.
We came here to live off grid to work in our artistic project, and suddenly we're fighting a mine.
I just want to say that, Tom, you have the most beautiful rainbow reflection on your head right now.
Yeah.
Happy Pride. Okay.
I didn't know what you were going to say, and I was trying to figure it out, and I thought you'd probably say voice. You do have a
Voice. I
great
was
voice,
going
Tom.
to I was going to say that your voice is like vegan butter.
Well, thank you.
All right. So I assume that you were up against like high-priced lobbyists. You sort of alluded to that a bit. So how do you make yourselves heard over the sound of all that money?
Through passion, showing up in person, and then having all these people who will share their own personal stories of why this place matters to them.
Mm.
Yeah. If you don't have access to the microphone that lobbyists have, we just need more people. So you need thousands of people. You need tens of thousands of people to make it clear that, this is something that we, the people, are not going to tolerate. And so we've made that clear to Michigan's lawmakers. Now we're trying to make it clear to some folks in the federal government. And yeah, I mean, the internet has been an incredible tool just in getting people informed and connected and inspired. I don't think when the internet was invented, it was really intended to connect and, inspire people as much as it did. It's kind of, the internet maybe oppresses us in a lot of ways with a lot of the junk that comes out of it, but it's also an incredible tool for connecting us.
I totally agree. Like, we all hate the internet now, and with good reason, and it does a lot of harm in a lot of ways. But if you're trying to do any kind of campaigning or information, I mean, and if you were alive in the before times, the difference is unbelievable. I mean, the ability to reach people. I also get the sense, and my sister used to live in Detroit, or right outside of Detroit. She was not a Michigander. I mean, she was there for a short while because of a job. But anyway, I got the feeling that Michiganders really love Michigan. Is that like they go on vacation, like to Michigan, do you think there's a special sense in Michigan about loyalty that you were able to tap into?
Yeah, very much so. Michiganders are for sure very proud of our state, of our water, of some of the wild places that exist here. And the Porcupine Mountains also hold a special role in the hearts of Michiganders because it's our largest state park, it's our largest old growth forest, it's our largest designated wilderness area. It was set aside. People had to fight to see this area saved from logging companies back in the early 20th century. So, the fact that past generations fought to see this area protected, and now there's new proposals to destroy it, I think it's inspired a lot of people to try to carry that torch from past generations and fight to keep this area protected.
Mm. And I understand that you actually use the arts in your campaign work to gather support. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we like to include as many people as possible and for them to be able to shine in with their passions. So we have organized different poster contests with this very creative pro-nature messages from different artists around the country. And then we have organized a songwriting contest as well. And we are about to organize a contest for, what was the title, Tom?
Just the human creativity contest. We couldn't decide,
Don't narrow it down.
Yeah, why narrow it down? But the idea being that, today AI is attempting to displace so many artists and musicians and writers. And it's doing a lousy job because most of the stuff AI makes is crap, It can be useful crap, but it's not like artistically valuable, in my opinion. But we want to make a contest where anybody from any field can submit a piece. It could be a dance composition, it could be a song, it could be art, but it has to be something that could have been produced before 1995. So we want to go back to like, what are all these incredible, of course, painting by hand, but also lo-fi video production and analog photography. Like, try to pick up the pieces that technological progress is leading to a lot of us forgetting. But, so many of these older art forms are incredible. And the only theme that we have is resistance to ecological destruction. So people can make any sort of art that they want as long as that is the theme.
How does this work? How do they submit it? And the mechanics of how it all works once somebody's come up with their work.
Well, it hasn't actually been announced yet, but this is going to air on July 3rd, right?
Right.
Wonderful. So I'll make sure the link is up by July 3rd. Anybody who wants to participate is invited to go to protecttheporkies.com and click on contest. And that'll give you the instructions for how to submit. We're giving out a couple $500 cash prizes and also exposure on social media. And we'll see if the community wants to chip in other prizes as well.
Cool.
I love that. That is super
And-
cool. I
and
was
just
in high
going back-
school in the early 90s, and I just remember so much like all of these art contests and writing contests where you would just like mail it, and it was such a different I really appreciate that you're harnessing the power of the arts around activism in this particular way. Sol, you were about to say something.
Well, artists are some of the most passionate people. They're sacrificing so much to create and live the lives that they live. But I was going to say, for example, with the poster contest, we ended up choosing the 2 winners. But then many of the other submissions made it into postcards that have been crucial in our fight with this movement. And then in our songwriting contest, it was just unbelievably beautiful to listen to all the submissions and all the different interpretations of people's love and passion for this area and how they transmitted that message. There were all different styles of songs included in the submissions, and now we will use some of them in a documentary that we are filming.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know about that. You'll have to tell us a little bit more about that. I just also wanted to mention that I just saw the other day on TV that the kids are all about the 90s these days. So you're right in the exact right decade.
I have the
Yeah.
low-rise genes to prove it.
I didn't mean you, Jasmine. I meant the actual kids.
Oh, got it. Okay. What were you going to say, Tom?
Well, just the 90s were cool. It's true.
I didn't know it at the time, though. I mean, I really, truly. What is the next move by them and by you?
Well, they really, really need money because every year they have less, and they're trying to make a mine that's going to cost about $500 million, and right now they have around 20 million in the bank. So they're scrambling for funds from Michigan, from the federal government, from other sources. So our next move is to keep creating a larger and larger public resistance so that any potential investors or funders see it as a risky and controversial investment. So we don't know exactly what form that's going to take. It's always changing depending on what they throw at us, but just to keep building momentum.
All right, tell us about that documentary.
Are you all familiar with the rights of nature movement at all?
Well, sort of.
So, I think it's really parallel to animal rights because and it's also pertinent to this year. We're being told this is the 250th anniversary of the country. We should all be super patriotic, etc. If you go back to the beginning of the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence, there were some nice values about individual freedom, etc., that didn't actually get implemented. In the beginning, of course, it was only white property-owning men who had any rights whatsoever. And then after a lot of resistance and bloodshed, it was all white men. Didn't matter if you had property. It's like, yeah, big win for white dudes. Only after a lot more struggling did it become all men of any color. And then finally, women received the right to vote in 1920. And to this day, of course, many groups are continuing to fight. But for most folks, we see universal human rights as the ultimate goal. Once we get universal human rights, we're done. Vegans and animal rights activists, we realize that human rights is only a part of the picture. Actually, humans are just one tiny fraction of the tree of life, and there's so many other life forms that should have rights. And most animal rights activists, we focus on animals that are captive in these industries, rather it could be farming or scientific experimentation or whatever. But the rights of nature movement is actually looking at trying to give rights to ecosystems. trying to give legal rights to rivers, to lakes, to mountains. And the very first rights of nature law was actually passed in the state of Pennsylvania back in 2006. And then a couple of years later, the country of Ecuador wrote a new constitution where natural entities were given legal rights, the right to flourish, the right to be restored if they are contaminated. In New York State right now, there is a Great Lakes Bill of Rights that is in legislature. It hasn't been voted on, and it's controversial, but there are rights of nature battles that are going on all over the world. And we want to make a documentary to highlight what's going on in the Lake Superior area, and the Great Lakes area more generally, because as the Great Lakes in total are about 20% of the world's surface fresh water. So we really think this area should be ground zero for giving legal rights to natural entities.
I love that. And I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but the Estrelita case in Ecuador actually extended that constitutional provision to an individual monkey. And it was the first really marrying of this idea of the rights of nature, which tends to be these natural entities and rivers and whatever, to an individual animal, an individual being, which is always a stretch. Like with the environmental movement, tends to look at the big picture, look at the the environment. The animal rights movement tends to look at the individual animals, and sometimes there's conflict there. But I think there's so much room, especially since you're coming from a vegan perspective, to really unite those spirits, because it should be that the people who care about rivers should be the same people who care about one individual monkey who got treated badly. It's a very interesting case anyway. That's very exciting. I really hope that happens. I'm getting the feeling it's in early days, but I would love to see that, because I think that is a cause that really can speak to people these days. I wanted to ask you, I should have asked this earlier when we were talking about the mine, but copper is often, it's advertised as absolutely necessary for the transition to green energy. Like, how do you deal with that argument? Is that an argument that they're making and saying how they're the good guys, and how do you respond to that?
Yeah, it was an argument they were making more under the last federal administration.
Now nobody cares anyway.
Yeah, so they want that copper. They know that. The arguments that they're going to use depend on who's in power and what is popular. So now they don't talk about green energy anymore. Now they talk about national security stockpiling and data centers and other things. But copper certainly is in almost any electrical device. It's in the technologies we're using now. What they don't advertise so much is that copper is infinitely recyclable. So it never loses its abilities. And yet there's very little resources being dedicated to recovery programs. It's all the copper that gets thrown out every year that ends up in landfills. Before starting new mines to destroy beautiful areas where creatures are living, we could be dedicating a lot more resources to recovering copper from landfills.
Wow. You must have you okay, stupid question. Have you been just learning a ton about this as you go? Because this is, so much of what you're saying is so fascinating to me. I'm mostly hang my hat in the world of like animal rights. So maybe that's why, because this is obviously animal rights related, but not specifically farmed animal or animal agriculture. Are you just like, what is your learning curve here? Is that a weird question? That's a weird question. Answered anyway.
Yeah. No, we came into this knowing absolutely nothing about mining. And we've had a number of mentors along the way who knew a lot more than us. And they learned it the same way that we did, from learning. They also went into their own resistance battles knowing nothing and learned from people who were knowledgeable around them. And so you just pick it up piece by piece. There's so much industry jargon, like all the mine waste they're storing. They were calling it a tailings disposal facility. I read that for the first time and I'm like, okay, I'm never going to understand what they're talking about. And then it clicked. Oh, it's just a bunch of waste. That's all it is. It's just toxic waste from mining that contains mercury and arsenic. And, so as a lay person coming into this, I think it makes us more effective communicators because we're not like hyper specialized with PhDs. We're just like regular people trying to make sense of this. And so it's easy to help other folks understand it.
Yeah, and it was really eye-opening to see that, yeah, we were clueless when we first find out about this project, and then everything that we could learn and everything that we could achieve just by spreading the information and getting connected to other folks who are passionate about it and who wouldn't have known about this if we hadn't spoken about it.
I love that. And relatedly, the boundary waters in Minnesota, which sounds like a very similar fight with the proposed copper mine, has been getting some national attention. And obviously, these fights have a lot in common. So here's the related part. How do you scale a local movement into a national political fight?
Yes, persistence, and getting as many people involved and meeting, face to face as possible. The internet is very important for getting people informed and inspired, but you also need to establish a community of people who get together regularly and talk about these things and brainstorm so that people are willing to invest time. Protect the Porkies. We don't have any salaried employees. It's essentially all been volunteers chipping in time. And the only reason it's been successful is because people care about this area and they're willing to fight for it. And the media didn't want to pay any attention to us at first. So we told all of our followers to, just start flooding all of these different media sources, demanding coverage. We've been covered in Newsweek, in the New York Times, in the Daily Mail over in England, which is kind of like a tabloid for UFO sightings and stuff. But celebrity gossip, but they have a wide reach. So we were grateful that they covered us as well. But yeah, just to keep building momentum and to be persistent and to our philosophy from the beginning has been to say yes to essentially any opportunity for connecting that came along. So the folks from the Boundary Waters campaigns have reached out to us and they wanted to chat. So we got together with them to build solidarity. We've met with other campaigns and other organizations, and we get contacted by high school students and university students who want to, do a report on the campaign. And we try to say yes to as many of those opportunities as we can, especially to get young people involved, I think is key because, I can speak from experience. I've over the years had a lot of political apathy and feeling like the system is broken. So, why try? But then throughout the course of our efforts, we've shown that if you get enough people fired up about something, you can stop $50 million from coming to this company that wants to destroy this area. That's a real change. But it requires actually calling and interacting with your lawmakers. So, this campaign for us, or for me, I should say personally, it's restored my faith that the system can actually respond to the people if we unite our voices.
Oh, it's really moving. It really is, especially at this moment when people are, I think everybody's in a moment of obviously despair, but also kind of glimmers of hope. And we really have to grab onto those glimmers of hope. And the fact that you have been able to be successful and in spite of being up against huge money is really moving. There are a couple other things before we let you go that I want to cover. And because we mentioned, one of the things was we mentioned darkness before and how important it is to animals, but you have an actual campaign about darkness, and it seemed like there's some law in Michigan that you're not allowed to be dark or something. Can you explain that and why this requires a campaign?
Yeah, it's so bizarre. That's actually why the New York Times got interested, because the Upper Peninsula has the only law in the entire country prohibiting dark sky parks. In Michigan, we have what are called dark sky preserves, which is essentially just a state park where they have limitations on the lighting. You can only have downward facing lighting so that the night skies are not impacted. These are prohibited in the Upper Peninsula. So there's many of them downstate, but upstate, there are none. It is crazy. And that's because the Upper Peninsula historically has been used as a resource colony where it's been all about corporations coming in to extract the wealth and export it elsewhere. And anything that endangers that agenda has to be shot down. So there's some very paranoid economic developers up here who think that if people start caring about the night skies, it's going to shut down the whole economy and we're going to go back to the Stone Ages.
Wow.
Which is ludicrous. But so our campaign is also fighting to see this prohibition on dark sky preserves overturned.
Well, now I understand, though I'm still like, well, not perplexed anymore because obviously follow the money. But wow, that is a weird one. The other thing that I wanted to make sure that we talked about is Reynard the House Wolf. Like talk about a change in you guys really cover the waterfront and the breadth of your campaigns. So tell us about who Reynard is, who both the real Reynard and the book Reynard, I guess they're kind of the same, and the inspiration, and tell people a little bit about it and where they can get it.
Yeah, the real Reynard is licking peanut butter out of his dog bowl in the other room right now.
Yeah, we adopted this cute little puppy about 6 years ago and became obsessed with him. And suddenly we thought, hey, why don't we make a children's book about Reynard? Because he's so cute. Everybody will love it. And then it kind of evolved into this really crazy adventure that is just for everybody. It's not only for kids anymore.
I read it. I loved it.
And instead of being only 25 pages, now it's 160, and with all pages fully illustrated. It's a story about compassion, growing your compassion as you get to know more and more characters and more places.
Yeah, essentially Reynard is he's a city dog. He's, living a very nice life, but he's watching the Nature Channel one day with his human companions, and there is a wolf that comes on screen and starts to howl, and Reynard starts to howl along. And that like triggers some enchantment in the world, because that night he has a dream about a wolf visiting him and daring him to come find the Nature Channel, or not the real world Nature Channel. And so the next day Reynard actually runs away and he tries to find these wild wolves from his dream. But it actually turns out to be quite complicated because he has to navigate shopping malls and, clear-cut forest and agriculture. It takes him a long time to get anywhere wild. But along the way, he meets all sorts of different animals and he talks to them and learns their stories. And it was meant to be a children's book in the beginning, but then it became really experimental and crazy. And we decided just to fling whatever idea we had at it. So now we're calling it a graphic novel.
I love that. And I was going to ask you this before, but it actually ties into the campaign that you're working on and your book, I think. I was earlier going to ask you if the issues that you're focusing on provide opportunities to find common ground with people who aren't there yet on veganism, but care about wildlife. And then you're talking about your book a bit. And of course, your book brings together wildlife and companion animals and even a farmed animal. So can you just talk about that? Do you feel we need to see this kind of unity amongst all these animals instead of thinking about them as different causes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we would agree that, more unity is required, whatever the topic is. We live in an area where a lot of people engage in hunting and fishing, and we're not big fans of these activities, as you can imagine. We've been vegan for quite a long time. But in trying to stop this mining proposal, we need these folks on our side because, even though they choose to want to harm and kill these animals, which we do not support, but they also require a clean ecosystem. These animals that they are eating are not going to serve them in any way. They're going to actively poison them if their water is poisoned. And so in all of our material, we never talk about fishing. We never talk about hunting because we don't want that to be something that is even part of the conversation. But we try to make it as clear as possible that fish are going to be harmed, that deer are going to be harmed, that, all of these creatures that certain humans feel the need to put on their dinner plates, they're going to be harmed. But we talk about it from the perspective of the nature's perspective, from the animal's perspective. And, we have a lot of conservative people. We have a lot of hunters that are on our mailing list that receive our material. And we just try to sow seeds here and there. You can't like smack somebody in the face necessarily with the absolute truth. I mean, you can. We support people doing that 100%. But in a movement like ours, which is about uniting the tribes, we go more for like sowing seeds. So in the Reynard the House Wolf book, we didn't want to make it an explicitly vegan book about like, everyone go vegan right now, have that written out. But we make sure that Reynard makes friends with an escaped factory farmed pig in the course of his adventure. And the pig talks a bit about his experience. So yeah, that's how we see it, as just like sowing seeds, gardening those seeds, and trying to help people reach the conclusions on their own.
Wow.
I think it's really powerful. And it honestly kind of reminds me of what's going on in the animal rights movement vis-a-vis beagle testing with the campaigns at Ridgeland. I know that sounds crazy, but a lot of the people who are working on those campaigns are not vegan, they're not farmed animal people, and a lot of the people are vegan. And of course, a lot of the leadership is very passionate, has always been doing farmed animal work, and all of a sudden they're working on dogs, and that might seem like giving up the farmed animals, but I really don't think so. It's like bringing together people who care about animals in any way whatsoever, and kind of I think you used the term cross-pollinating those ideas. And this work that you're doing is very, very similar. You're coming at it from a vegan perspective, but working with people who have very different perspectives about animals, but who do care in some way about what's going on. And we need to do that, because otherwise we're going to be the tiniest movement. We are the tiniest movement, but I think it's very powerful.
Yeah, it's interesting because there should be more connection. There's a lot of really well-intentioned environmentalists who are now using the term biocentric, where they're approaching every fight not from the perspective of what's good for humans, but what's good for the ecosystem. But then maybe at the end of the day, they go home and they have a big steak from a factory farm for dinner, and like that's something that is perplexing to us. But there's no one in the world that is 100% consistent in our philosophies and our ideals. We're all at different steps on the journey. So I think we have to try to meet people on their own terms and kind of all help push each other in a better direction.
Right. We're at the strange bedfellows part of our movement development, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's a really good thing. I mean, how can people find out, before we let it go, more about Reynard and about your work in general?
Yeah, you can find more copies of Reynard the House Wolf on my website. That is solanzorena.art. Maybe you can help me with the spelling, Tom.
Yeah. They'll see your name, solanzorena.art.
And we'll link to it in the show notes as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and there's more of my work there, my paintings, my jewelry, and I try to make everything as eco-friendly as possible and not use plastic, use recycled beads even if I can. And my paints are all vegan and non-toxic. I really pay a lot of attention to the materials that I use. And yeah, we will keep sharing what we're doing on Instagram. You can find me at sol.anzorena.art, and then Protect the Porkies as well has an Instagram with all the actions that we ask people to do. You can see them there.
Great.
Yeah, for people who are not on social media, good for you. You can also go to protecttheporkies.com and sign up for the email list.
Wonderful. And as I said, we'll have all the links, but this has been so inspiring and really informative. I have more questions for you, so I hope you'll stick around for our bonus content, which is for our flock members. But let me say a big, huge thank you to Sol Anzorena and Tom Grotewohl. Thank you both for all that you're doing and just the way you're doing it. It's really very beautiful. So thank you for spending time with us today on Our Hen House.
Thank you all for all your incredible work as well.
And thank you for our listeners and our viewers. You can donate if you're interested and become a flock member so that you could hear some of this bonus content. It's always, I don't know what happens, but when we're recording the bonus content, it's like the guests are like already oiled up. So they're like it's ready, and the bonus content is so good. So if you are listening to this and you want more Our Hen House, then go to ourhenhouse.org/support and you can get some of the perks that come with that as well. Thank you to Vicki Beechler and Jen Riley. And don't forget to catch our next episode of Rising Anxieties on Tuesday. Follow us and share this episode on all of the socials, Facebook, Insta, TikTok, Blue Sky, at Our Hen House. And thank you for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.